Join me in welcoming the other panel members on board as well, ladies and gentlemen. May we please invite Mr. Kamlesh Vashne, CIT from International Tax. May we also invite forward Mr. Simachal Mohanty, Head, Global Taxation, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. Welcome, sir. And may we also lastly invite Mr. Mayur Desai, VP Taxation from Ambuja Siemens. On that note, let's get ready to rake our brains with this very last but invigorating panel session, I believe, and make sure that you have some very interesting key takeaways from this last session. On that note, it's over to you, Mr. Kothari, for taking charge of the session.
Thanks. So, welcome to the panel. It's a privilege to lead this last discussion, penultimate discussions today. I have with me on my left Mr. Kamlesh Vashne, a very senior person from the tax department, is the Commissioner of Income Tax, International Tax. For most of you who have been practicing in international tax and transfer pricing, Mr. Vashne needs no introduction. He has been instrumental in setting up the APA regime, and the success of that I would largely attribute to Mr. Vashne's efforts. So, here with us today, we have the privilege of having you on a very important subject. After that is Mr. Simachal Mohanty, who's got many years of experience as a head of tax of one of the largest pharmaceutical company in India, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories out of Hyderabad. An interesting facet of Mr. Simachal Mohanty's portfolio that he handles 50 countries where Dr. Reddy's has got a presence in India, in the world. And I think we cannot have found a person who would have such a large experience from India of having to practice transfer pricing and global tax. So Mr. Simachal is going to be with us and answering some important questions on what he confronts across the world. And then we have Mayur Desai, who is now the head of tax of Ambuja Siemens and with ACC, and more than 33 years of experience as a professional, and almost 32 out of that, interestingly, as a consultant. So that's a very rich experience that now brings to industry. So now he has, I think, the industry has the benefit of even having a consulting professional amongst their midst. I think we're going to have your benefit of your expertise on two different counts, what you've seen in profession as well as what you see as a part of the industry. So welcome all of three of you. We have an interesting subject, GAR versus TP overlap, and I think what you've seen in the last couple of years, especially what is emerging as the new landscape of challenges. BEPS is now, of course, in an advanced stage of implementation in various parts of the world, including in India. There are several new subjects that we now need to contend. That is misallocation of profits generated by valuable intangibles. So intangibles get a great focus in the current environment. Contractual allocation of risk is the next item which is there. So there are several items that are now being discussed that erstwhile were not part of discussion of transfer pricing. And now we of course have another challenge. We have GAR that's being implemented from 1st of April 2017, which also is going to be a large challenge to deal with going forward from a perspective of how does a transaction or an arrangement comply with the GAR regulation. So we have, how would I say, two elephants in the room, if I may put it that way. So it's an interesting facet and a phase that we are now undergoing. Maybe another few years, it might just settle down into some kind of a rhythm that we are aligned to understand where the tax world is moving. But given that as the new landscape that is in front of us, I think I'll get a quick reaction from my industry colleagues from here, Simachal and Mayur. How does this new landscape of transfer pricing post BEPS with introduction of GAR, does it worry you or not? That's my first question to both of you. A very quick reaction from you before we jump into the big questions that all of you would need to deal with.
Yeah, thank you, sir, and thanks Tax Sutra for this opportunity. Whether it is GAR or BEPS, I think the language is same. We have to align our value creation with the substance. This particular substance word, we didn't hear first time in BEPS or GAR. We heard first time on the direct tax code. I'm talking about draft direct tax code in 2010 when it came into circulation. That time, everybody was sensitized about what is substance. For some reason, that has not come into our Income Tax Act fully, but Uh, the kind of sensitization, it has started from 2010 when the draft direct tax code has come into picture. From that point of time, I think everyone has started visualizing the situation, what has led us to the situation like having implementation of BEPS or GAR kind of situation. So from that point of time, sir, all the companies are fairly aware of the substance criteria and fairly aware of the consequence of otherwise also. So to answer this question, whether we're worried, no, we're not worried, but we're certainly watchful.
Mayur, your reaction?
First of all, thanks for your kind introduction. See, my take is like this. To begin with, this is a time where a lot of changes are happening. You see GAR coming in, you see POEM provisions are coming in, you see thin capitalization setting in, you see BEPS, various recommendations being adopted, and they becoming forceful also. Some of things are introduced in the law, some of the things are in form of our agreement with the international community to adopt the BEPS. So many changes are happening. The basic thing that I would like to, tell this audience is that when I started learning law, when I was learning Companies Act or Income Tax Act, that first case you remember, Solomon versus Solomon. A person is different than the company. So the form of an organization was being emphasized upon. That if you are a corporate firm, then as a single shareholder, you are still different from yourself. Now you have to unlearn all these things. You have to learn new things. GAR, substance over the form. The form which was being taught to us right as a first step is now no more valid. So basically, sometimes I find learning is easy, but unlearning something which is fixed in your mind is more difficult. So we are facing such kind of an environment. There is always curiosity, there is always apprehension when you are facing a change. And we are facing a very big change. So there is a fear of unknown to some extent. If your question is whether I'm worried, one doesn't know what is happening. And not that something in form of a law is not known to me. There is no fear of unknown. It's the way it will be implemented also. I'm sure that now we have seen that in India also, there is a lot of maturity as far as implementation is concerned. But still one doesn't know the way this will be implemented, how it will be acted upon. And that's why one has to be watchful. That's my take.
So if I may put it is that I think both my panelists are saying that it's not going to be such a big worry with the new perspective. I think there's a certain amount of maturity already there in the system. There is not so much of a fear of unknown that we see despite these new changes that we see in terms of BEPS as well as GAR that is coming in force. So I take encouragement from those comments from these panelists. And as in continuation of that, Mr. Vashni, and I think it's an honor to be with you on this panel. And we'll, of course, we'll look forward to several of your comments on this panel. And the first question, of course, will be to you. Last 3 years, we have seen remarkable change in India, how we practice tax. My first observation is that the number of disputes with the tax authorities is shrinking, which is very welcome. That aligns with the central government's promise that they would promise us a non-adversarial tax regime. I think more or less this promise being lived up to. And given that, I think, with these two new animals that we now see in front of us, BEPS versus GAR, and especially in the context of transfer pricing, which is revitalized with the BEPS provisions or BEPS actions and recommendations, do you still see an active role of GAR in India? So that's my question to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. So the take from the industrial experts was that generally, they are apprehensive about GAR, but not as such worried. So that's to start with, that's a good news for the government, bad news for tax officers. So, but anyways, first of all, your questions, to answer your questions, there are two parts. First is, how often GAR will be invoked? So that is something, in my view, personal view, that GAR is a very effective tool against abusive arrangements. Do we have abusive arrangements in India or outside India? The answer will be yes. You know, if we ask that question, each one of us will agree that yes, there have been abusive arrangements and which have been grandfathered, fine, but in future, is there a likelihood of creation of new abusive arrangement? That is where the purpose of this particular section is, to stop people to create more abusive arrangement in future. So the success will depend how effectively we are going to implement GAR. And therefore it is necessary that in whichever case we implement GAR, that is taken to a successful conclusion. There are courts in India who are going to examine whether you correctly invoke GAR or not. So we should invoke GAR in limited cases which are really abusive, and to ensure that right till Supreme Court they are upheld. Then only a correct message would be given to the people outside that the time to create abusive arrangement is over, and now we should pay our tax fairly. So that is a very important. So from that perspective, if we start invoking GAR in every case we see, let's invoke GAR, then quite likely that we are going to lose those cases in courts, and that will send a very negative signal outside. So it is very important that correct cases are picked up and they are taken to their successful conclusion. And for that reason, there are many checks, at least at two places. One is the commissioner has to apply his mind whether it is a correct case for invocation of GAR, and then there is an approving panel which has only one tax officer and two people from outside the tax department. So therefore, first question that you are not going to see GAR being invoked in many cases, but yes, in some cases it will be invoked to send the right signal. And the second question is interplay with transfer pricing. See, one thing you will notice that in transfer pricing we determine arm length price. So it is a specific anti-avoidance rule that may not cover all the situations which are mentioned in GAR. So what is mentioned in GAR? Principal purpose test plus 4 tainted elements. So the law says that principal purpose test must be satisfied, and then one of the 4 tainted element must be satisfied. That it is not at arm's length, it is abuse of tax law, it is not bona fide, it lacks commercial substance. So even if the transaction is at arm's length, there could be a case where the arrangement fails principal purpose test and it satisfies one of the other 3 tainted elements. Of course, it is already satisfying arm length principle, but it could be commercially, there is no substance, or it could be abusive, or it could be not bona fide. So in that case, technically GAR can be invoked. So merely you cannot say that because this transaction has been subject to transfer pricing and the price at which this transaction has been undertaken is at arm's length, GAR cannot be invoked. So that interpretation is not correct. GAR could still be invoked if other tainted elements are satisfied. But of course, as I said earlier, there would be few cases where GAR would be invoked, because the idea is to send the right message across and make sure that people in India from future don't form abusive arrangement.
Thank you. I think that sums up very well what we always apprehended, that GAR would be read with every transfer pricing arrangement. That does not seem to be the case, is what I'm hearing, and I think that would inspire a lot of confidence in the industry and business, how GAR will be taken. What you mentioned is that it will be used as an exceptional rule, and not in every situation GAR would not be examined. I think that would go a long way in terms of inspiring confidence that the SAR itself has the teeth to be able to deal with situations where there is a flouting of arm's length principle, or even an arrangement that otherwise would not seem to be justifiable. So with that, I think I go back to question number 1 of the FAQ, which was given in the circular that came on transfer pricing by the CBDT in January. And the question clearly sets out the rules of the game, that despite SAR existence, transfer pricing regulations, that is the transfer pricing regulation being the SAR, GAR could still have a play. Now, given that, and there's an overlap between the SAR and there is transfer pricing regulations versus GAR, what is the interplay that you see? Is that which one will prevail? And how would you see, Simachal, if I may ask you, how do you see this unfolding from a practical perspective?
Thank you, sir. Something is coming to my mind on a very lighter side if I share that. We treat transfer pricing as a normal medicine and GAR as an antibiotic actually. So doctors are supposed to prescribe antibiotic in only exceptional situation and medicine in normal situation. And if you don't want to take medicine, stay healthy and do right things. So, and if the disease is such a big disease, which is not cured by the medicine, then probably antibiotic or whatever. So because I belong to a pharma company, something came to my mind as I was talking actually. So now coming to the difference between SAR and GAR, I like to give two very small examples. One in a case of domestic situation, another in case of a business restructuring. In case of business restructuring, what happens? Suppose an Indian subsidiary is there in India, where the tax rate is 34%. It wants to avail a loan, and it is availing a loan from a foreign bank, which is sitting, say, in a low tax jurisdiction, say, maybe in Russia or, say, UK. Instead of getting a direct loan by the subsidiary, suppose its parent company, which is sitting in, say, UK or Russia, low tax jurisdiction, it is taking a loan, and the bank is charging, suppose, 7% interest to that guy. And how the bank has charged only 7%, it has seen a consolidated financial. Holding company in UK doesn't have substance, but subsidiary company in India, it has got a lot of substance. It saw the financials, it saw the value of shares, and it has granted a loan. The tax rate, suppose it is charged 7%, and the holding company is charging, say, 10% interest rate to the subsidiary. The subsidiary is taking a higher tax break. 3% profit is parked in holding company where the tax is less. As far as subsidiary company is concerned, we are satisfying 30% of EBITDA rule. We have done a tax deduction. Then we have done a LIBOR plus whatever percentage at arm's length. All these things is final, or all these things looks fine. But still the GAR can be applied because this guy could have directly taken the loan, and basis of this guy's financials, the loan has been given by the bank. Another situation, very, very small situation and simple situation I can envisage in a domestic tax. When the company is in a MAT, so as per Apollo Tires, whatever Supreme Court judgment as per Apollo Tires, in case of Apollo Tires, it says that whatever profit is there in the books, you can pay tax on that and forget it. Suppose there is a portion of expenditure which is impermissible expenditure, then definitely you are going to take a deduction as far as the book profit is concerned and apply MAT, you take a break. That is prior to GAR. But post-GAR, in my view, although the GAR provision also uses for notwithstanding, 115 JV uses for notwithstanding, still the GAR can apply and increase the profit. So these are the two situations I can envisage where the GAR can apply even in the case where TP is compliant, SAR is compliant, all these things fine. Thank you.
Mahir, would you like to add something to what Simachal has to say on the subject?
I fully concur with the example of normal medicine and antibiotics. That's a very good way to understand. But if you look at the basic provisions, you go to section 100, and it clearly spells that the provisions of this chapter shall apply in addition to or in lieu of any other basis for determination of the tax liability. So there lies the answer in the act itself, that GAR can always come in play in addition to the SAR or any other basis of determining the tax liability.
Right.
Maybe from there only it was put as a question that does it mean to say so, and that has been clarified in first answer that yes, that can coexist. So basically I concur with.
So I think if all three of you are saying that if the SAR is there, there's a transfer pricing compliance, but if there's something that is still missed out, GAR should be able to have a look into that kind of transaction as well.
Yeah, I'll just add, the example was correct of that taking loan, but only thing is I'm afraid UK may file a contempt against Mr. Mohanty for calling it a tax haven.
No, I'm not talking tax haven. I'm just calling it a low tax jurisdiction actually.
Lovely. Again, Simachal, back to you again. If you look at arrangements which are typical transfer pricing arrangements, where they are considered as arm's length, for example, business restructuring, where there's a arrangement that could be called as an arm's length transaction, and which is so would you still consider that there could be a threat to GAR from GAR in this kind of situations? That's something that could worry us going forward from a practice perspective, despite doing everything from a perspective of complying with the TP regulations on a typical case of business restructuring, which essentially is one of the core functions is also to understand that we would like to bring down the effective tax rate globally. Would you still consider GAR as a threat in this situation?
Sir, if you see the GAR definition, it uses the word impermissible tax avoidance arrangement, which results into tax benefit. It doesn't stop there. By doing this, you don't fall into GAR. Either you have to do a tax abuse, or you have to enter into a transaction which is lack of substance, or which is entered between two unrelated parties, which is not supposed to be. So these things, if you fail, then only the GAR will apply. Simply by doing a business restructuring, putting the IP in a low tax jurisdiction, with substance, with proper manpower, with everything, I think GAR still will not apply, because GAR doesn't stop with taking the tax benefit. It also extends that the transaction has to be void of the commercial substance. It has to do some abuse of some tax provision. So in my view, it has to be seen holistically if somebody has to apply the GAR.
Quite right. Mayur, would you like to say something on the subject?
Milind, I agree with Simachal, but as Mr. Varshney explained in the beginning of the talk, GAR has 4 tenets, or maybe as we understand that it should be commercial substance, it should not be abusive, it should be ordinarily employed for a bona fide purpose, or maybe main purpose test one has to look at. So it's a different field. There
Right.
may be some overlapping with the TP. At the same time, what TP ensures is basically it ensures arm's length price of the transaction. It ensures comparability.
Right.
So both are having their own different objective. While one may look overlapping in some of the cases, and where it overlaps, as Mr. Varshney also explained, that let TP operate, let GAR do not come into play. But so coming to your question, that in case of a restructuring, if it is meeting with the arm's length, let me give a simple example again to take 1 more minute. Suppose if there are various OPCOs in a group with one holding company, let me not go to the low tax jurisdiction or something generally. Now, Indian OPCO is sitting on a cash. What the holding company does, ask Indian company to acquire another OPCO of the group, thereby creating a basis for payment
Right.
and cash out from India. At the same time, a borrowing is being thrown upon or pushed upon to India. And then interest cost also. I may meet with thin capitalization route. My interest may be still within 30% of EBITDA. I may meet with all the laws of arm's length pricing, that the sale of that underlying OPCO is at the appropriate price, interest rate is at appropriate price. But if there is no commercial substance to this transaction, then it can always be attacked under the GAR. That's my
Quite. So I think I'm just joining the dots between what Simachal you mentioned and you also said, and Mayur probably corroborates to that, is that if there is a transfer of IP, and the key word is lacks commercial substance. So in a situation there is a transfer of IP from one jurisdiction to another, what is the threat of an argument that this lacks commercial substance? And I think This question, even Mr. Vashni, you can also give your view on the subject because, of course, it will be very interesting to understand. Because this is a typical situation where one would say there is a transfer pricing compliance because of arm's length price being met with, and there is a structure that is being done over here, which is transferring the IP from one jurisdiction to another. And can an argument be taken that this lacks commercial substance? So maybe we can take benefit of your views and then each of you again after that.
Yes, I mean, it could very well be possible that IP is transferred from one jurisdiction to another and arm length compensation has been paid before transfer. But tax officers can say that what is the first of all, what is the purpose of transferring IP? You know, because principal purpose test first, and then one of the tainted element. If that is satisfied, then probably he will invoke GAR. So therefore, it is necessary that when you are transferring IP from one jurisdiction to another, just meeting arm length price is not important. You have to ensure that there is sufficient justification, commercial justification for transfer of IP.
Quite right. So what could that be? What is commercial? How do we deal with the challenge of lacks commercial substance, if I may put, Simachal, in a situation that you conceive where you wanted to transfer IP from, I'm not saying your company is doing something similar, but considering the situation is there in front of you, how would you be able to put your argument to justify that there is this transaction as commercial substance?
Let me talk about the commercial substance in a generic manner, because IP transfer, definitely entire thing has to be transferred. Typically in pharma companies, what happens, you acquire always two types of IPs. One is in process, another is fully developed. When you acquire in process IP, what happens, you give for further development of that IP to any of the third person. Because you may not have capability to undertake the development, you may not be R&D center itself, you simply acquire the IP and give to a third party. But in that situation, the entire, critical functions, because you don't have the capability, entire critical function is done by outsourced agents, which is third party. In that situation, you should have capability at least to monitor what is happening as per the development, exploitation, maintenance, all this. You should have capability to monitor that, and you should have capability to influence that. If that is not going right direction, you should have capability of influencing that, so that you are the real IP owner in terms of action plan 8 to 10. The other example, if you are acquiring a fully developed IP, nothing is left to be developed. You simply acquire IP, engage one of your related party as a LRD, and you start selling the product. In that situation, you should always ensure the people who are in charge of supply chain, the people who are in charge of, in controlling position as far as the sale is concerned, they are taking charge in the entity which is owning the IP. If your intention is to create substance and the corresponding profit there.
Right.
So basically, just to summarize, Action Plan 8 to 10, it gives a lot of importance to the intellectual mind of the people over the money power. Thank you.
Mayur, would you like to add something to this, or you? All right. I think that brings me to the next question, Simachal, is that, and of course, if going with your experience of having to work in 50 different jurisdictions across the world, do you see that there is a global practice that you would like to highlight in terms of overlap between GAR and TP? I know for a fact that countries like China use GAR extensively in arrangements. There are more than 200 cases where GAR has been used by China, is what my understanding is. Do you have experiences that you can share with all of us?
So I'll share with one of my experience. We had given a loan to one of our subsidiary. That subsidiary was a very initial stage of acquiring a plant. When he gave a loan to that subsidiary, that is way back in 2005, that was making loss actually. Then the tax authorities of those countries, they recharacterized that loan as a equity, and they started disallowing the interest. Although there was no provision available for recharacterization, there was no provision for thin cap, still they did it. And there are also GAR provision in that country. Luckily they didn't apply that, they stopped with the transfer pricing adjustment. And other countries also I have seen in my experience where the GAR is there, it is used very, very sparingly. It is like a teacher stick. You should be afraid and study well. If you do something correct, incorrect, then stick will come to you. But as such, you shouldn't be worried about the stick actually.
I think I'll go back to Mr. Vashni. If you have your view on the subject, of course, you gave the preface that GAR would be used as an extreme measure in an exceptional situations, but do you have anything that globally you would have observed in this particular subject that you would highlight the audience, how GAR has been?
No, same thing. The global practice is that it is used in not in many cases, because the idea is only the abusive arrangement should be attacked, and as I said earlier, it has to be tax authorities must ensure that it is sustained in court of law. Chinese authority don't have to think about that, so maybe there are so many cases.
All right, I think that's a good summation of the challenge of GAR, if I put it in the larger context. Action 8 to 10, Simachal, if I may ask you, is that there are several aspects of that that we need to take notice. Contextual arrangements, legal ownership of intangibles, funding with only very limited amount of financial risk, which is there. There's a big canvas of transactional profit split method that otherwise we don't seem to be taking heed to. A lot of recommendations out there in 8 and 10. There is a trend that we see that BPS is taking us to. Is there a divergence that you see in the context of GAR versus BPS that we should be aware of?
Sir, to answer this question, whether if the action plan 810 is applied, whether GAR can still be applied, if that is the question, my answer to this, theoretically yes. Suppose if a
And if I may
transfer
just
pricing
rephrase
officer,
this a little bit, Simachal, is that
Okay.
my question also is that, do you see the tests which are there in Action 8 and 10
yeah.
have something that does not seem to have, or there is a divergence in transfer pricing? Do they speak different language, if I may put it in simple words? So, well, of course, we did understand that GAR definitely has a role to play, despite the fact that transfer pricing has already been taken into account. But is there anything that you would seem to notice that, oh, transfer pricing tests are different as opposed to GAR tests? Is something like that, would you say that there is that?
Yeah, so again, I'll tell similar thing. As far as action plan 8 to 10, theoretically, GAR can be applied even if a transfer pricing officer has applied 8 to 10 principle and done a transfer pricing adjustment, still GAR can be applied. But practically, if you see action plan 8 to 10, it is so stringent and it is so demanding. Practically, if you comply with action plan 8 to 10 in the subject matter, where it is applicable, a tax officer may not have a scope to go to GAR and again apply GAR. Because the principle is same. Principle is same. The substance, it is talking about substance, GAR is also talking about substance. The action plan 8 to 10 condition is so vast and so strenuous. Of course, the action plan 8 to 10 condition, it is a reiteration of the existing TP principle, but now it has been formalized. But I feel in those situations where action plan 8 to 10 is applied, there may be very little scope to apply GAR. But in other cases where 8 to 10 is not applicable, definitely GAR can be practically applied.
Thank you. And I think I come back to Mr. Vashni again to you on the issues of the recommendations of the BEPS. How do you see them unfolding in the light of Indian transfer pricing regulations? What is the role of the recommendations or BEPS action points that are there from a practice perspective? Do you see that it is as good as a law that we need to look at BEPS recommendations, or you think there's something more that need to be done in the regulations so that the authorities are enabled to look at the action and recommendations of BEPS? How would you see this?
See, BEPS recommendations would fall into various baskets. One of the basket is that if you have to implement that BEPS recommendation, you have to amend your domestic tax law. For example, action point 6 suggests principal purpose test or LOB test. So you can have it in the treaty or you can have it in your domestic law. Or there are certain other BEPS recommendations for which you have to amend your tax treaties, which is being done through MLI, which was being signed yesterday. And the third is that you don't have to amend anything. Like transfer pricing guidance note, action 8 to 10, except that optional item, which is low cost services. There, these are guidance note, how transfer pricing is to be done, how DEMPI functions have to be taken into consideration, how risk control over risk is to be taken into consideration, how value creation is to be taken into creation. All these things, for that you don't have to amend your Income Tax Act or you don't have to amend your tax treaty. Once India as part of G20 has accepted Action 8 to 10, those guidance notes are automatically applicable to us. So India doesn't have to do anything. So far as Action 8 to 10 is concerned, it accept that optional item. The guidance note given there, which all G20 and OECD countries have accepted, it is applicable to us. So we don't have to do anything. But just I have a different view to what Simachal said previously. If Action 8 to 10 are complied with, I feel that GAR can still apply, because principal purpose test is not covered in Action 8 to 10, it is covered in Action 6. So that Action 6 PPT gets converted into our domestic GAR. So there could be many situations where even Action point 8 to 10s are complied with, but arrangement could still be abusive, and therefore PPT could be attracted.
Thank you. I would like to have you continue with the next question, because this is something that is close to your heart, the APA regime. I think all of us would endorse that APA is successfully delivering in reducing tax disputes in transfer pricing over a period of time. And I think as we see more bilateral and unilateral directions coming from APA, that would substantially reduce the dispute. In terms of APA, and I have two questions in two parts. The first, as a GAR interplay in the middle, there are issues that have been already settled under the APA regime, and there are applications that are still pending before the APA, which are still not heard. How does GAR come into play? If you may just, and also the BPS, in the light of the new BPS, say for example, Action 8 and 10, how do you see that? The arrangements that have already been accepted, as well as arrangements which are pending review?
Yeah, so let's take Action 8 to 10 BEPS, APA, which have already been concluded. See, India view have always been what is written in Action 8 to 10 now. We have always been advocating this particular principle of transfer pricing. So basically, when we have concluded APA, maybe Action 8 to 10 was not in public domain at that point of time, but we always had those principles in our mind when we negotiated APA with the taxpayer. So in my views, even if APA has been concluded and after that Action 8 to 10 have been formalized, it shouldn't have any impact on the APA. And going forward for the new APAs, obviously, the principle which have been laid down in Action 8 to 10, that is being taken care of by the APA team. So, so far as BEPS is concerned, there is no concern. All the principles which are written down in BEPS are taken into consideration by APA team when they negotiate APA. So far as GAR is concerned, once again, the same technical point. In APA, we are determining arm's length price of a transaction. GAR is attacking an abusive arrangement. So transaction could be a small component of that whole arrangement. So APA team may not have examined the entire arrangement. So therefore, just because APA has been signed on a particular transaction doesn't mean that the transaction which is part of an arrangement is permissible arrangement under the domestic law. So that should be kept in mind. So APA is for a particular purpose. That is what is the arm's length price, and we should stop there.
I think that that's a good practical tip for us to carry back, is that APA does address what's on the table, including endorsement and adherence to Action 8 and 10 recommendations, if you may put it. And therefore, it is taken for granted that you've already complied with 8 and 10 before you go to APA. And therefore, GAR should therefore not have a challenge. But if something is missed out, GAR can, of course, have a role to play. So that's an important carry back for us as taxpayers and tax advisors to our clients, for that matter. I think, Mayur, it's your turn to answer the next question. And I think we've seen thin capitalization getting introduced in the last Finance Act, as we see. And we have a 30% ceiling on interest deductions of the EBITDA. In a situation where there was no section like this, GAR could have come in very handy to recharacterize transaction, which is otherwise a debt as an equity. But after having this introduction of this particular section, What is the role of GAR now? Do you still see GAR threat where something like this were to happen?
Milind, I would, like to answer it from perspective of overlapping of three different aspects. One is, as you said, that yes, thin capitalization rules, where I adhere to certain percentage of EBITDA in terms of interest payments. Second is that interest should still be at arm's length under transfer pricing provision. So what, even if I am paying 10% of my EBITDA as the interest, it can't be at non-arm's length rate. It has still to be LP rate, correct? So there is another aspect to it. And the third aspect too, in spite of these two, whether a GAR can come into play or not. So I would like to put it this way that yes, as Sir said, Mr. Varshney said, there are certain tenets, if it is commercially viable or maybe there is a commercial sense to transaction, it is not abusive. And the example which I earlier gave also, debt push is very easy and it is within the group, and creation of the debt within the group also is something which is most practiced international method to transfer the profits or the shift the basis. So therefore, one cannot say that if I have met with thin capitalization rule, because thin capitalization addresses your capital structuring. It doesn't address other tenets, one of the four which Mr. Varshney said. Right. So there is something which we'll have to always keep in mind, that there is something called GAR, which will have to always be kept in mind. So there has to be a commercial rationale to everything we do first. Right. It should not be abusive, number two. And it should be done in a manner that the ordinarily, with a bona fide test, transaction appears to be.
Right. Thank you, Mayur, for this very apt answer that you gave. I go to the next question, and that's in the context of the grandfathering provision that is there. And of course, the question number 5 of CBD circular propounds what is, sorry.
Sorry. There is a very celebrated case of Australian tax court, right, Chevron, which dealt with the question which we dealt last, where they have examined interplay of thin capitalization versus transfer pricing. Right. Now, interestingly, Australian transfer pricing rules provides for hypothesizing, that means recharacterizing of the transaction, and that was being resorted to in that. Maybe to that extent, sir, maybe what you have explained, a small question that comes to the mind, is that what happens, because sections 92 to 92F, read with Rule 10, various rules, doesn't allow hypothesizing of a transaction under the Indian context. It says that you have to make it comparable with regard to FAR, with regard to terms and conditions, product and services, and so many things, as it is for the taxpayer. So again, those old questions, that can OECD guidance go beyond what is provided in the domestic law and all. I don't want to get into that because those answers are always open, and we have debated whether rules can extend the scope of an act or such other thing. But that one question that remains in the mind, sir.
That you are correct. See, any rules or guidance note cannot expand the scope of the Income Tax Act. That is clear. But as you read the Income Tax Act and income tax rules about transfer pricing, they are so broad that if a guidance note gives you certain discretion, then probably, of course, it will be tested by the court of law, but revenue officers can always say, so long as it is within the boundary of the Income Tax Act, that this action 8 to 10 guidance note allow me to do these things, therefore I am empowered to do these things. Because generally the way transfer pricing law and rules are drafted, they are quite broad. And they are actually in line with how it has been drafted in other countries. But
so I think that sums up the debate about what could happen in a situation of thin capitalization versus recharacterization of transactions. And it brings me to the next question, Mr. Vashni. We have the scope of grandfathering clarified in the answer to question number 5 in the CBT circular. Where does transfer pricing sit in it? That now we have certain transactions which are grandfathered by virtue of this answer. Does transfer pricing still have a role to play in such transactions?
I mean, grandfathering is only for application of GAR. It will not stop application of arm's length principle. The transactions, like for example, if you are, that whatever that question number 5 is talking about issuance of shares and all that, it still has to be at arm's length. The price which are charged,
So I think so there is no placating that just because we have a grandfathered provision applicable in GAR, the arm's length principle could be obviated from a transfer pricing perspective.
Whatever is the transaction,
That's
of
correct.
course, issuance of share may not be covered, but whatever the transaction, even if it is grandfathered, but it has to meet arm's length principle.
Right. One subject that really probably seems to be falling out of question number 5 is the issue of shares through a merger scheme. What could be the thought? Mayur, you probably would want to give some view here, and then again, Mr. Vashni, you could add to what Mayur has to say on the subject.
So this relating to question number 5 particularly, it has not covered the scheme of merger. It says, it uses the word split or consolidation. Shares brought into existence by way of a split or consolidation of the holding by bonus issuance or certain things. So basically, prima facie, it does not cover. The recent circular under 1038, section 10, subsection 38, where they have exempted capital gains. To that extent, this gets diffused because, when it is not taxable, one may look at it from that perspective. But still, I personally feel that yes, question number 5 does not cover merger or shares acquired upon merger per se. Sir would like to say.
So what is the question basically?
That whether question number 5, which is grandfathering certain acquisitions, would cover merger or shares
Share
acquired
issue
under merger
in the course of merger.
or acquisition.
So let me just give an example. Let's say there is a Mauritius company which is holding an Indian company A. Now, Indian company A gets merged with Indian company B. So therefore, the Mauritius company, which was earlier holding shares of A, is now holding shares of B. The question is whether the new acquisition of share B, which is after 1/4/2007, would be covered by GAR, or it would continue to be grandfathered because investment in A has been grandfathered. There is no doubt on that because investment in A was prior to 1/4/2007. So this particular situation is not covered in the circular. So probably, hopefully, if this question is raised, then CBDT will consider it. So I can't tell you CBDT position. I can probably give my personal view on this, which may not be CBDT's position. So basically, when Mayur talked about 1038, I don't think we can import anything from 1038 because 1038 is talking only about levy of capital gain tax. Whether capital gain tax should be 0 or there should be a long-term capital gain tax. So there are situations where even if the purchase is not through security transaction tax, even then long-term capital gain tax would continue to be at 0 rate. It would continue to be exempt. So that is 1038, but it does not, but 1038 still admits that there is a transfer of shares. So that means shares have been transferred from, you were holding shares in A, that have been sold, and now you have acquired shares in company B. So there is transfer of shares. So the moment there is transfer of shares, there is new investment. So new investment is after 1/4/2017, it is not covered. But then there is section 47. Section 47 says transaction not considered as transfer. Now if that is the case, now once again, I am repeating that disclaimer that this is my personal view. Now if it meets the conditions of section 47, this merger from A to B, then Income Tax Act says that this holding in A, you were earlier holding shares in A, now you are holding shares in B, and this transaction is not considered as transfer. Then one can take a plea that because my investment was before 1/4/2017, therefore grandfathering should be allowed. So this is how I view it. So section 47 may come to rescue.
Thank you for that succinct answer. And I move on to Simachal, back to you. And you seem to be the medicine man and a pharma man on the panel. You gave a very nice, interesting analogy as you started. And I need to come back to you again. And I think we live in interesting times where we see a lot of trials by the media. And I refer to a press report that came about 2 weeks ago, where RBI has questioned some certain pharma companies of offshoring their IP. So something has started from RBI. This is not a tax issue, if I put it at the outset. But the RBI is questioning the IP transfer by several pharma companies, and this is part of your industry that you would probably have better insight. And therefore, this question to you is that something that starts from RBI, how do you see this as a risk from a GAR perspective? But obviously, I'm presuming that the transfer of IP would have complied with the transfer pricing regulations when the IP was transferred. But given that RBI is now questioning the transfer of IP to offshore jurisdictions, do you think GAR will have to have a role to play here, or you see this as disjointed and not probably how this should be read?
No, I think both are interconnected in my view, but I have also read in newspaper only. And I've not come across a specific case where I can relate because I'm connected to major pharma companies. I know the people there, but I have not come up with a specific case where I could have related the RBI action vis-a-vis a GAR action. But yes, the principle, if you have applied the principal purpose test, you have fulfilled substance, you have not abused anything, then I think we shouldn't worry about whatever RBI has taken, as an initiative or as a step. But RBI also, I'm not sure, but RBI also would be definitely looking about these aspects in addition to the money laundering aspect. I'm not sure about the issue in depth. This is only my presumption, because I'm not come across a live situation post this media report.
Right. So, Mr. Vashni, from a perspective of how tax authorities view this kind of a news report, is that would it put some kind of an undue pressure on the tax authorities that where RBI has disregarded something like this transfer of IP offshore, and it is putting this transaction under the lens, tax authorities also would be compelled to do something here in invoke GAR? Would you say something like this?
See, tax authorities, obviously, if RBI is taking certain actions, so a tax authority will definitely have a look at it and will examine whether the provision of GAR apply to it or not.
Right.
So that's a normal course, whatever actions are happening, actions are taken by regulatory authorities. It is quite natural that other tax enforcement authorities, which
Right.
could be tax one or it could be other enforcement authorities, would automatically have a look at such a transaction.
Quite right. So I think in a sense what we are looking at is that we will be compelled to look at these arrangements, because if RBI is going to disregard this IP transfer, there's a very good chance that tax authorities also may want to look at it adversely, is what we would look at it. All right, I think that brings me to the next question, and this probably all three of you can answer in different ways, is that there is FAQ on GAR that has been given by the CBDT, and it's several questions that have been answered. Some more questions could have been answered. What is your take, Simachal? Does it meet with your expectations that all that you were looking from a transfer pricing perspective that could have impacted arising out of GAR, is it being answered here, or something is still left unsaid?
So in my view, it is quite comprehensive, and it is a very nice attempt on the part of the government to come with these clarifications. Nowadays, whenever you see a particular provisions in explanatory memorandum, we'll see a lot of examples last 3 to 4 years. We see these kind of initiatives in addition to the GAR examples, whatever has been given. But I think with the growing changing of time, I think those list of examples should also grow over a period of time. That is only my request or my ask. For example, there's something is coming in Ind AS. Suppose there has been APA issued, and because of Ind AS, there is a change in your accounting position. Whether GAR will come into picture, although it has been blessed by APA, but the subsequent development is due to a regulation like Ind AS regulation. So definitely as a taxpayer, always I'll be asking more and more from the in clarification front from the tax authorities. And it is up to the expected level till now. That much I can do. Thank you.
Before I come to Mr. Vashni, I think, Mayur, would you like to
No, I share the same feeling that this is a very good exercise being done and a lot of clarification have come. But, and to some extent, if there are some examples as stated by Simachal, it would have been welcome because that gives more clarification. You see SOM committee's report and such, this was, supported by various examples. So same way. If I point out one or two specific instances of the circular, now say for example, when you are talking of LOB clause, okay, then the answer reads like that, in case of avoidance is sufficiently addressed by LOB clause, then that will be considered as a sufficient condition for not applying the GAR. Now, once again, it is a subject matter of an interpretation that what is considered to be a clause or which LOB clause will be considered to be sufficiently addressing the cases of an avoidance. Similarly, I was talking to some friend and we were just generally, a professional friend, we were just generally talking that now whether arrangements which are sanctioned by the court, GAR would apply or not. He said, no, it is covered in FAQ. If it is sanctioned by court, GAR will not apply. If you carefully read that answer, it says that where the court has explicitly and adequately considered tax implications while sanctioning the arrangement. So if it is merely court which has blessed some arrangement which is filed with the court, which happens in most of the cases when the merger passes through the company's court, then probably this question is not grandfathering or this question is not sheltering it. So my call is again that be careful, read it carefully, and it is still open for some interpretation issues.
Sure, thanks, Mayur. And I think final to you, Mr. Vashni.
Yeah,
Your
I
comments.
think, see, that is a given position and acceptable to everyone that as much as possible clarification to be provided to ensure certainty in the mind of taxpayers and also tax administrators. But yeah, example is a very, I'm not saying example should not be given. Examples have been given. IPC, in fact, is full of examples. But there is always a danger in the sense that once you start giving example for something like GAR, you give an example that this arrangement is acceptable, then all the minds will start working out an abusive arrangement which looks like this arrangement. So GAR has been introduced to tackle abusive arrangement. What will you do to abuse this instruction which is giving example? So basically, so that is an apprehension in the mind of tax administration that, once you give example, there could be an abuse of example. So probably that may be the reason why examples have not been considered. But of course, this is an evolving exercise. CBDT has come out with one FAQ. If people still feel concerned, they can still clarify more questions. I mean, this is an ongoing exercise. It is not a one-time exercise.
Thank you, Mr. Vashni. That was a very good summary of what the FAQs have to deliver. And I think on the examples, I think what does not seem to have, with the fodder for the creative minds has not been given in terms of examples. So I think with those closing remarks, I must thank the panel for giving such lucid and thoughtful answers. So thank you very much, Mayur, Simachal, and Mr. Vashni for being here. You come from Delhi, and Simachal, you came from Hyderabad. Thank you very much for these answers. And with this, I wind up this session on an important subject that would confront us.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. If anyone has questions.
We can take a couple of questions. I know it's 5:45 here.
Simachal, you would need to read.
Audience, would you like to engage in conversation with our panel members? The last opportunity for the day. Any hands rising in the air? We never asked for a pin drop silence, ladies and gentlemen. We never did that. You're free to speak, it's an open platform.
That's
Okay.
all. Yeah.
Arun, when there is no question, either everything is understood or nothing is understood. And I don't know what proposition Milind would like to carry
No, I
forward.
think more than the question that I asked, I think the answers you gave does not give any room for more questions, is what I would say. So thanks to the panel again, and it goes very well with Simachal, your aspiration to leave at 5:45 to reach the airport.
Thank you, sir.
Just about time that we would conclude. Thanks everyone here, and thanks to audience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kothari, for holding on to the strings of the panel, and thank you, speakers, once again. So, well, that was their interpretation, the last session, of course, on the overlap of GAR and TP. A round of applause if you all grasped something. So, we do believe that the former part is true, that you grasped everything, in fact. And we would request all of you to please come forward for a group photograph.
I must compliment you all for this time management, which has been fantastic all throughout the day.
All kudos to the organizers that way. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, throughout the day, our speakers have been definitely giving you and trying to give you a 360-degree perspective on the world of transfer pricing, as we say. But the endeavor doesn't stop here. We must, of course, keep up the efforts, keep up our efforts and endeavor to, of course, foster mutual collaboration and knowledge sharing. That's what we are here for. And yes, I have a very befitting person, right, standing to my right, to, of course, extend a thank you note to all of you. So let's welcome Arun on the stage one more time. And thank you, speakers, for your presence and your valuable insights indeed. Over to you, Arun. Just a second.
Yeah, yeah. I think the applause now should be for the cocktail. I think it's, especially for all those who really came early morning. I think I got a call yesterday from one of our advisory board members, Uday Bhai, and he said, "Are you serious? The agenda says 8 a.m." I said, "Yes." We tried to tempt everyone with an early morning breakfast. I know that was very early, but thanks so much for coming, everyone coming in at 8 o'clock for the CVCR panel. I think it's encouraging for not only the speakers, for also the organizers, that we also have a heart in our mouth, that can we start on time? Will there be an audience at 8 a.m.? But that's something that we also have got inspired from some of the conferences overseas, where the first session starts at 8:15. So great that we've had a day full of TP diet, and it's been a very diverse diet and different cuisines within the TP diet. Wonderful, from the morning keynote session on the future of transfer pricing, value creation, P-attribution, where the Formula One case was discussed, and we got some international perspective as well. Then we talked about GST, transfer pricing, and Ind AS cocktail. Wow, that is some cocktail, I must tell you. And we've come to APA, and now finally GAR and TP overlap. And I was just mentioning to Ashish ji a while ago, transfer pricing really has become very complex. It gives me a little bit of reassurance that the TP summit is here to stay for the next few years. Be it BEPS or no BEPS, I think we need an annual dose of a TP summit and TP diet. On that note, I think I would like to thank all the speakers, especially the senior IRS officers, Akhilesh ji, Kamlesh ji, Ashish ji, who spared their valuable day for all of us. A big round of applause for them, please. Our partners, all our partners, also the hotel, the audience, and a special mention of Zara Ritchie, who flew in from Australia to be with us and share her international expertise. A big round of applause for her as well. And of course, the wonderful audience. I think that's over and above everyone. If we are on time, I think a lot of it is to do with you all being a great audience. And thanks so much for patronizing us and coming here again and again so that we can organize conferences like this. A lot of people told us over the last few days that are you sure that you're organizing a TP summit 3 weeks before the GST deadline? And we said yes. I was not sure whether that was bravado or that was quite daring or a calculated risk. I think ultimately it proved to be the latter. But I'm sure that next year we'll be a little bit GST free and a little more TP oriented. I'm sure that a lot of us are still carrying the GST hangover even in this TP summit. All the best for everyone who's trying to ensure a successful migration to GST. We are just 3 weeks away, 22 days to go. A few announcements. This is the trailer, and we have as good a picture, a second, part 2 in Delhi, Gurgaon, in October coming up, the 3rd edition of our tax conclave, annual tax conclave, and you're going to have the biggest names from all across the tax world. First edition we had Philip Baker, people from the OECD, the Indian Revenue, and all the top speakers. Last year we had the OECD Tax Policy Director for the first time coming to India to give a keynote, Pascal Saint-Amans. This year again we are going to have senior representation from the OECD, the Deputy Tax Policy Director, Grace Perez, who's going to be here, plus several other top speakers from across the globe, and of course, hopefully participation from the Indian Revenue as well. So don't, I know GST, there will be compliances. We've still not finalized the date, only to see, there are a lot of people in industry holding out that 1% chance of a GST postponement. If that happens to September 1, we'll have to rework our conclave date as well. Hope we don't have to. Hope the government keeps its date to July 1 so that we can organize the tax conclave in the first or second week of October. A little bit of plug-in about our websites. We run 6 websites, one on international tax, one on transfer pricing, one on corporate law, one a historical database combined with a commentary of Chaturvedi Pithisarya called Orange, one website on accounting, I think I've almost covered, and one of course on indirect tax and GST. We also have a GST mobile app which is free for the next few weeks at least, GST Sutra, so you can download it both on Android as well as on iPhone. And if anyone wants to subscribe to any of our websites, please contact our sales team. Kalpana is right here. We also have an e-learning course on GST, GST Pro. It's a 14-hour e-learning course. So if you're too busy and I have only time at 2 in the night to study GST, then the best way to do it is to subscribe to our GST e-learning course. And you can take that 14-hour course anytime within a period of 1 month. We've priced it at only 5,000 rupees, including tax. That's been developed in conjunction with one of the leading law firms, Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan. And that's it. I think, welcome to the cocktail. Thanks once again for making this second edition of ALP Summit a big, big success. On behalf of Amay, me, and the entire Tax Sutra team, thank you again for making it. Please join us for cocktails. Thank you.